Nestled into a rolling hillside north of San Francisco, Skywalker Ranch is the command center of George Lucas's filmmaking empire. I first came here to interview Joseph Campbell, a friend and mentor to George Lucas. 12 years later, I came back, this time to interview the protege. After a 22-year hiatus, George Lucas is back in the director's chair with a new episode in his Star Wars epic, The Phantom Menace. I wanted to know why he thought the Star Wars saga had grasped such a hold on our collective imaginations. Over the course of an afternoon, we talked about myths and movies, fathers and sons, fantasy and imagination. Joseph Campbell said that all the great myths, the primitive myths, the great stories have to be regenerated if they're going to have any impact, and that you had done that with Star Wars. Are you conscious of doing that? Are you saying, I am trying to recreate the myths of old? Or are you saying, I just want to make a good action movie?
Well, when I did Star Wars, I consciously set about to recreate myths and the classic mythological motifs. And I wanted to use those motifs to deal with issues that existed today.
Did you have all of this in your mind before you got the pencil to the page, or were you making it up as you...
Well, some artists, they see the picture whole, completed. I see the picture in a fog. I know sort of what it looks like, I know what's there, and so what I do is I say, I want a costume that is very regal, very grand, very different from anything we see, but has a lot of cultural history behind it. So I don't want to make something up. I want to use something that is from a living human culture. It's not like I'm working from a finished thing. I'm working from something where you have a lot of pieces and it's vague and you try to put it together.
Where do these rough ideas come from?
Now that I don't know. That's a mystery.
But 25 years ago, when you cast the original plot, you didn't see these costumes.
What happens is no matter how you do it, when you sit down to write something, all of the influences you've had in your life come into play. The things that you like, the things that you've seen, the observations you made, that's ultimately what you work with when you're writing. And you are influenced by the things that you like, designs that you like, characters that you like, moments that you remember, that you were moved by. It's like trying to compose a symphony in a way.
And do you have any sense of where that comes from in you? I mean, your own creative precincts?
The psychology of developing fantasies is a very interesting and delicate thing. I've come across people that have no imaginations at all, and it's a very interesting...
They become journalists.
Well, I was shocked the first time I came across it. And... because I just assumed everybody had an imagination. And when you confront somebody who doesn't, especially a child, it's a very interesting and profound thing to me. An imagination is a trait. It's like anything else. It's a talent, or it's an ability you have to cope, like dreaming.
The underwater world, for example, in The Phantom Menace, looks as if it's a dream. Where did that idea come from? Out of your own fantasy?
Part of it is, where can I go that I haven't been before? And underwater was one of those places I hadn't been before. But I wanted to create a very special, sophisticated, but organic kind of society down there. And it really wasn't until we created sort of digital cinema that I was able to suddenly have my imagination go wild.
And this enables you to do what, digital?
It allows me to create sets that I could not have otherwise.
Right there on the computer screen.
They're on the computer screen. I can create backgrounds and sets. I have a scene that takes place on a landing platform in the middle of a city. Well, before digital technology, you just couldn't shoot a scene like that. It was just impossible. You couldn't build a set big enough. You couldn't create that reality. And it's the same thing with characters. Jar Jar or Watto. You couldn't have a character like that. I mean, Watto is a short little blue character that flies around. You couldn't put a man in a suit and accomplish that.
I've had psychotherapists tell me that they use Star Wars sometimes to deal with the problems of their child patients. And they've said that the most popular character among the children is Darth Vader.
Well, children love power. because children are the powerless. And so their fantasies all center on having power. And who's more powerful than Darth Vader? You know, some, will be attracted to Luke Skywalker because he's the good guy. But ultimately, we all know that Darth Vader is more powerful than he is.
Did you feel?
And as time goes on, you discover that he is more powerful because he's the ultimate father, who is all powerful.
This is where I disagreed somewhat with our friend Joseph Campbell, who said that the young man has to slay his father before he can become an adult himself. It seems to me, and I think you're right on here, that the young man has to recognize and acknowledge that he is his father and is not his father.
Joe used to talk about the basic issues that create the mystery of life, of birth and death. And I like to always add, your relationship with your parents. Obviously, my first mentor was my father, but then you progress with either, people that are more skilled in a particular area than you are. In film, Francis Coppola became my mentor and taught me how to write screenplays, taught me how to work with actors. I was much more of a cameraman and a film editor, much more on the technical side of things. And, I think my last mentor probably was
Joseph Campbell.
Joe Campbell, who asked a lot of the interesting questions and exposed me to a lot of things that made me very interested in a lot more of the cosmic questions and the mystery. And I've been interested in those all my life, but I hadn't focused it the way I had once I got to be good friends with Joe.
A professor I know said that he recently asked his freshman class how many of them had seen all three of the trilogy, and everyone in the class raised his hand. And he said to me, I hope Lucas knows he's mentoring an entire generation of young Americans.
I have a philosophy that we all teach, and we all teach every day of our lives. And it's not necessarily what we lecture. I've discovered kids don't like lectures at all. But it is really the way we live our lives and what we do with our lives and the way we conduct ourselves. And once in a while they listen to the lectures. So when I make the films, I'm very aware of the fact that I'm teaching on a much larger scale than I would just as a parent or somebody walking through life, because I have this megaphone. Anybody in the media has a very large megaphone that they can reach a lot of different people. And so whatever they say, whatever they do, however they conduct themselves, whatever they produce has an influence, and it's teaching somebody something. I try to be aware of what it is I'm saying.
What do you make of the fact that so many people have interpreted Star Wars as being profoundly religious?
I don't see Star Wars as profoundly religious. I see Star Wars as taking all of the issues that religion represents and trying to distill them down into a more modern and more easily accessible construct that people can grab onto to accept the fact that there is a greater mystery out there. When I was 10 years old, I asked my mother, I said, well, there's only one God. Why are there so many religions? And over the years, I've been pondering that question ever since. And it would seem to me that the conclusion I've come to is that all the religions are true. They just see a different part of the elephant. I mean, the real question is to ask the question. Because if you haven't enough interest in the mysteries of life to ask the questions, is there a God or is there not a God? That's for me the worst thing that can happen. If you ask a young person, is there a God? And they say, I don't know. I think you should have an opinion about that.
Do you have an opinion, or are you looking?
Well, I think there is a God. No question. What that God is, or what we know about that God, I'm not sure. The one thing I know about life and about the nature of the human race is that the human race has always believed it's known everything. Even the cavemen thought they had it all figured out, and they knew everything there was to know about everything, because that's where mythology came from. It's constructing some kind of context for the unknown. So we figured it all out. It was fine. I would say that, cavemen had, on a scale, understood about 1. Now we've made it up to about 5. The only thing that most people don't realize is the scale goes to 1 million.
The central epic of our culture has been the Bible, and it's about fall, wandering, redemption, return. But the Bible no longer occupies that central place in our culture today. More and more people today, young people in particular, turning to movies for their inspiration, not to organized religion.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that doesn't end up being the course that this whole thing takes, because I think there's definitely a place for organized religion. That's a very important part of the social fabric. And I would hate to find ourselves in a completely secular world where entertainment was passing for some kind of religious experience.
One reason, one critic said, that Star Wars has been so popular with young people is religion without strings attached, that it becomes a very thin base for theology. In fact,
well, it is a thin base for theology. That's why I would hesitate to call the Force God. When the film came out, almost every single religion took Star Wars and used it as an example of their religion. And were able to relate it to young people and saying this is what, and relate the stories specifically to the Bible and relate stories to the Quran and the Torah and things. And so it's like, if it's a tool that can be used to make old stories be new and relate to younger people, that's what the whole point was.
Have you been influenced by Buddhism? Because Star Wars came along just about the time there was this growing interest in America in Eastern religions. And I notice in The Phantom Menace, the new episode 1, that they discover this slave child who has an aura about him. And it reminded me of how the Buddhists go out to look for the next Dalai Lama.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's again a mixture of all kinds of mythology and religious beliefs that have been amalgamated into the movie, and I've tried to take the ideas that seem to cut across the most cultures, because I'm fascinated by that, and I think that's one of the things that I really got from Joe Campbell, was that what he was trying to do is find the common threads through the various mythology, through the religions.
One of the comparisons that came to mind just when I was rewatching the series recently is when Darth Vader tempts Luke to come over to the Empire by offering him all that the Empire has to offer. I was taken back in my own youth to the story of Satan taking Christ to the mountain and offering him the kingdoms of the world if only he would turn away from his mission.
Right.
Was that conscious in your mind?
Well, yeah, I mean, that story also has been retold, the temptation. I mean, Buddha was tempted in the same way. It's all through mythology. I didn't want to invent a religion. I wanted to try to explain in a different way the religions that have already existed.
You're creating a new myth.
Well, I'm telling an old myth in a new way. I'm just taking the core myth and I'm localizing it. As it turns out, I'm localizing it for the planet, but I guess I'm localizing it for the end of the millennium more than I am for any particular place. This is this is again part of the globalization of the world we live in. The average human being has much more awareness of the other cultures that coexist with them on this planet, and that certain things go across cultures, and entertainment is one of them, and film and the stories that I tell cut across all cultures, are seen all around the world.
So what lessons do you think they're taking away from watching Star Wars in Italy and Malaysia and South America?
One of the main themes in the film is having organisms realize that they must live together, and they must live together for mutual advantage. Not just humans, but all living things and everything in the galaxy is part of a greater whole.
There's something that happens in a darkened theater when the right moment occurs.
You know, when you've seen a picture, it connects with you in a particular kind of way. A good novel operates, again, you have this little voice going on, you're saying, you know, this has something to do with me and my life. Art is a very human thing because it relates, I think, to the issues of beauty, and not just visual beauty, but intellectual beauty. What is beauty, and what does beauty trigger in our brain, and why do certain colors and things mean certain things to us, and certain sounds, certain chords make us feel happy or sad? And how is it when you take all these things together and recreate reality in a way that you can evoke sadness or crying or laughter, or, you know, it's a very interesting human experiment. And I'm fascinated by it every day. I mean, I'm just completely amazed at how the thing works. I know quite a bit about it, but I know very little about it. And as Joe would say, follow your bliss. It's to follow your talent is one way to put it. That's the way I see it. The hardest thing to do when you're young is to figure out what it is you're going to do. And you'll never know what it is you're going to do. But if you follow the things that you enjoy, I'm not sure anybody really enjoys making money. They may enjoy what they do after they've made it, but they don't enjoy the process. If you can find something that you actually enjoy the process, then you found your bliss.
When did you know what it was for you?
When I discovered movies.
Which was?
Which was when I was in college, where I could be in a psychology class or be in an anthropology class. Suddenly I loved being in school. I loved learning this stuff. I was either going to go to one college where I was going to be basically an anthropology major. I was going to go to another college and be an art student. And then I ended up going to another college and being a film student. But I truly believe that no matter which of those routes I'd have taken, because I was interested in all those things, I would have ended up right back where I am now. Because I certainly had no intention of making theatrical films when I went into the film business. I loved making documentary films, and I loved making sort of avant-garde, non-story films. And here I found myself, and I hated writing. So now I found myself writing. I found myself running 3 companies, which is the last thing in the world I wanted to do. I enjoy it, but I've walked down a path. I followed the things that I thought inside were the things I should be doing.
You make it sound so easy. You're so relaxed and so laid back. But was there a struggle?
Well, there wasn't really a struggle, because I think when you stumble, it's like falling in love. You know, and falling in love is tricky, because sometimes you can be infatuated with somebody, or you can be sexually aroused by somebody, but that isn't falling in love. And you sort of have to move away those momentary things that come and go within, days or hours, and try to say, this is the real thing. When you fall in love, you pretty much know it. And when I fell in love with movies, I definitely knew it.
How did you know it?
I was just in a place where I was very happy. When you get into something that you like and you say, this is great, this is something I want to do, it takes a lot of strength to stick with it, because a lot of the times it's not what society deems as a worthy thing to do, and not what your parents particularly want you to do. My father wanted me to go into the stationery business and run an office equipment store.
Was that a struggle not to do
It wasn't a struggle, because I knew immediately that wasn't what I wanted.
Is that what he did, run a stationery store?
Yeah, and he was, he built it up for me and for me to take over, and he was pretty much devastated when I refused to get involved in it.
What did he say?
Well, he said, well, you'll come back and, you'll see that making your way in the world isn't that easy.
How did you tell him?
Well, I basically that was probably the biggest disagreement we ever got into. And I got really mad at him and just basically said, I'll never work at a job where I have to do the same thing over and over again every day. And he just didn't want to hear that. And I knew that that wasn't my, he said, there's a lot of, it's a good job, it's a good business, you can make a lot of money, you'll be successful. And I said, I don't want that. I just don't want to do it. He worked very hard to be able to give this to me. And so for me to refuse it was a big deal. And he thought that I would go off and starve to death as some kind of artist somewhere, living in a garret.
Is he still living?
No, he died a number of years ago. But he died after I did Star Wars. So he was very proud of me at the end. And I did the only thing you have to do in the end. You only have to accomplish one thing in life, and that is to make your parents proud of you. If you're healthy and you can take care of yourself and you're a good person, you contribute to society and not take away, that's all your parents want in the end. There's two sides to the Redeemer motif that I've got in the Star Wars films, which is that ultimately Vader is redeemed by his children. And especially having children, I believe that. I believe that you are redeemed by your children. Because that's what life is all about, is procreating and raising children. And it should bring the best of you out.
Are you going to be prepared for that moment when your daughter says, your older daughter who's about to go off already, and say, this is the way I want to go, Dad?
I think there is a point where even though you love your children a great deal, you must let go, which is actually what The Phantom Menace is about.
The Phantom Menace is about letting go?
It's about letting go.
In what sense?
In the sense that you have this young boy who's 10 years old who has to leave his mother and go off on his own. And the mother has to let him go because otherwise he would be a slave the rest of his life.
It's about cosmic, galactic, epic struggles, but it's at heart about a family, the large myth set in a local family.
Well, yeah, and most myths center around characters and a hero, and it's about how you conduct yourself as you go through the hero's journey, which everyone goes through. It's especially relevant when you go through this transition phase. Most societies, it's when you're 13 or 14. In our societies, it's sort of 18 to 22, somewhere in there. That you must let go of your past and must, embrace your future, and in your own self, by yourself, figure out what it is, what path you're going to go down.
Is it fair or accurate to say, in effect, that Star Wars is your own spiritual quest?
Well, I would say there's part of that. I'd say part of what I do when I write is ponder a lot of these issues. I have ever since I can remember. And obviously some of the conclusions I've come to are, I use in the films.
Now, some critics scoff at this whole notion of a deeper layer of meaning to what they call kid stuff. But I come down on your side, on Joe Campbell's side, when he says kid stuff is the stuff dreams are made of.
Yeah, it's much harder to actually write for kids than it is to write for adults.
Why?
Well, because they're more susceptible to anything that doesn't ring true, and they, on one level, they will sort of accept. They don't have constraints, so they can open their minds up, and they're not, locked into a particular dogma. And at the other side, if something doesn't make sense to them, they're much more critical of it. Adults don't like to think of things as being right and wrong. It's too difficult for them to rationalize their own behavior in that kind of a world.
So when you write, do you see your audience, and do you see a 13-year-old boy?
I see my audience, and my audience is me. I make these films for myself more than I make them for anybody else. I mean, I'm lucky that the things I believe in and the things that I enjoy and the things that entertain me entertain a large population. Sometimes they don't. I mean, I made a bunch of movies that nobody's liked, so that doesn't always hold true. But I certainly wasn't out to become successful. It happened.
You're financing your own movies.
I'm financing my own movies, and it allows me the freedom to have my own vision be accurately portrayed on the screen, and I will, be successful or unsuccessful based on how people relate to that vision. But I don't have a lot of other people coming in and telling me really what to do. So I have bought my freedom, but I've also bought the freedom for everybody who works for me, because I think the core issues that I'm dealing with are, if they were valid 2,000 years ago, they've got to still be valid today, even though they're not in fashion.
Why are they out of fashion?
Because I think it's harder. The world we live in is more complex, and I think that a lot of those moralities have gotten to be grayed to the point where they don't exist anymore. But those issues are still there in most people's minds. The importance of, say, friendship and loyalty. Most people look at that and say, how corny. But, the issues of friendship and loyalty are very, very important to the way we live our lives. But it's not common knowledge among young people. They're still learning. They're still picking up ideas. They're still using these ideas to shape the way they're going to conduct their life. And you need to tell the same story over and over again every generation, so that generation gets it. And I think we've gone for a few generations where a lot of the sort of more basic stories have fallen by the wayside.
And what do stories do for us in that sense? What are myths?
They try to show us our place. Myths help you to have your own hero's journey, find your individuality, find your place in the world, but hopefully remind you that you're part of a whole and that you must also be part of the community and think of the welfare of the community above the welfare of yourself.
I hear so many young people today talk about a world that's emptied of heroism, where there are no more noble things to do. What do you say to them?
Everybody has the choice of being a hero or not being a hero every day of their lives. And you can either help somebody, you can be compassionate toward people, you can treat some people with dignity, or not. And one way you become a hero, and the other way, you're part of the problem. And it's not a grand thing. You don't have to get into a giant laser sword fight and blow up 3 spaceships to become a hero. I mean, it's a very small thing that happens every day of your life.